million names will be submitted to Congress who signed the petition in support of preserving net neutrality on the Internet. 1 million names will be going before the U.S. Congress today. And I think realistically this is just the beginning of this campaign, something Adam will be talking about. That number will be small by the end of this summer, the end of this year, as more Americans learn about the utterly corrupt process that's going on to privatize the Internet and fundamentally stop it from being the Internet. But that's not the only issue. Next week, the Federal Communications Commission is going to announce that it's going to reevaluate the cross-ownership ban, which prohibits a company from owning a newspaper and a broadcast station in the same community. This is the cash register singing dream of big media owners in this country, that they can have all the media in a single town they own. They can have one newsroom serve an entire local community, so there will not be competitive newsrooms. They saw what happened to radio in 1996 when the ownership caps were lifted. They saw how much money they made stripping out local journalism, stripping out local content. And the fantasy now is to extend that across all media and local communities. So the big, powerful media conglomerates, the Tribune companies, the Sinclair Broadcastings have put the heavy pressure on the politicians to deliver to get rid of the ban so they could own 8 radio stations, 3 TV stations, and the daily newspaper and the Internet service provider in the same community. That's going to come up this summer, and that's going to be an issue that will be, again, as big as the net neutrality campaign, if not bigger. Many of you might remember in 2003 when it was the media ownership campaign that so many of the great groups here in Washington and grassroots groups around the nation worked on that really vaulted media politics into the public consciousness. 3 million people contacting the FCC and Congress to protest the relaxation of media ownership rules. It was of singular importance in the court decision that finally threw out the changes the FCC made was the fact that the FCC had not acknowledged the public input on these rules changes. Just this week again, Congress voted to slash the budget for public broadcasting. Adams Group, Move On, again, has coordinated a signature campaign. 1.5 million Americans, I think is the latest count, have now signed on to preserve and keep what we have in terms of public broadcast funding, which is paltry to begin with, pathetic even, but it was going to be cut. All in all, what we're seeing is a dramatic increase in a movement here and an awareness of media policy issues. I think it's fair to say that this fall, for the first time in modern American history, a significant percentage of political candidates on the trail, Republican and Democrat, liberal and conservative, red state, blue state, all across the country, for the very first time are going to be asked about issues like net neutrality. They're going to be asked by their constituents about issues like media ownership. For the first time for a politician in this country, it's not just going to be talking to the AT&T lobbyist or talking to a consumer group lobbyist in your office, but it's going to be talking to your constituents about issues of importance to them. That's how far this movement's come. It's been an extraordinary, exploding movement, and we're just at the beginning. Right now we're playing mostly defense. We're trying to protect what we have. Eventually, as we grow, we're going to start playing offense. We're going to be proactive. We're not just going to preserve the status quo, stop it from getting worse. We're going to change the status quo to make it better, to make it serve democratic values and principles of freedom of the press as inscribed in our Constitution. Now, I want to, before I hand it over to Congressman Sanders, I do want to put a little history in here. 5 years ago, if I had opened up a talk with what I just said, they would be putting me in a straitjacket right now. Because the idea that you could make a political issue out of media 5 years ago was simply unthinkable. The idea that you would get 1.5 million Americans signing a petition for public broadcasting, 1 million Americans signing a petition or contacting members of Congress about net neutrality, 3 million Americans contacting members of Congress at the FCC about media ownership rule was simply unthinkable in the year 2000 or any year prior to that, going back as far as you want to go into the 20th century. This is truly an extraordinary development. Until recently, media simply wasn't an issue. Most Americans assumed, actively encouraged by media public relations firms, that media in this country was a private domain owned by private companies. That was the natural free market American way. That was the way the founders wanted it. And that was the only way you could possibly have it in a democratic society. Increasingly now, Americans realize that is balderdash. This is not a free market media system. all the largest media companies are the recipients of enormous government subsidies and monopoly licenses, direct and indirect. They have huge lobbying arsenals in Washington and in state capitals to win these monopoly licenses and privileges. And the real issue that people have woken up to is that the policies that have benefited these firms, the cable companies, the phone companies, the broadcasters, have been made in the public's name but without the public's informed consent, without the public's awareness, without their involvement. And that is what has changed and changed so dramatically. And I think it all has come to a head primarily because the nature of our media content has been so deplorable that people finally rose up and said, we can't have a free society, we can't have a healthy democratic society with a media system that doesn't cover what's going on that affects people's lives, that doesn't cover the issues of importance in communities or nationally, that doesn't present various perspectives. It's marinated in commercialism, where the journalism basically concentrates on celebrity or spoon-feeding us press releases from people in power rather than questioning what people in power are spoon-feeding us. That this is not an acceptable outcome for a free society. And if we want to make our advances on any of the issues the people in this room care about, and I suspect very few of the people in this room care first and foremost about media, but whatever the issues that drive you to be in this room, to be at this conference, to be an engaged citizen, if we don't win media, we can't win those issues. They go hand in hand.